There he is, Prince Harry, after keeping royal organisers on tenterhooks over whether or not he would attend his father's coronation. Prince Harry's appearance was, in the end, a blink and you'll miss it moment.
Yeah, one man who hasn't blinked in, let's say, 24 hours or more, royal editor at the Daily Mirror, Russell Myers. He's at Buckingham Palace front and centre for us this morning. Russell, good morning. We'll get to Harry in just a moment. But first, you were there yesterday. What was it like?
I was. Good morning to both of you. Well, first and foremost, an incredible privilege to watch such a wonderful ceremony. I mean, it does, of course, seem completely archaic at times. There's sort of nudges between the press pack thinking we're in a sort of Game of Thrones set. But, I mean, when you look at the actual majesty and a ceremony that has gone back 1,000 years, a real privilege to be involved today.
All right, let's talk about Harry now, because we saw him enter on his own. And the Queen and King hadn't even had their portraits taken before he made his exit.
Well, no, I mean, a brief trip. We've been saying it for the last few days that it was always going to be a very brief trip to Harry. I mean, for Harry, he'd been invited to the Buckingham Palace event. Certainly, he wasn't going to be at the balcony appearance. That was working royals only and a few of the children. But there's a reception for the family later on this evening, and he had been invited to that. But he was using the excuse of his son's 4th birthday. So, I mean, less than 24 hours in the country for Harry. He couldn't get away quick enough, but straight on that plane and back to California. And, you know, I don't think that this was the time for reconciliation with his family. I think that things need to die down considerably for that to happen.
So we saw those pictures of him making his way to his seat at Westminster alone. He was largely separated from his brother, from William. How would he have been feeling?
Well, certainly, I mean, you talk of relegated to the 3rd row. It was sort of always going to happen because working royals at the front and behind the sort of main players, as you will, the Waleses and their children. And I thought he looked quite stressed when he came in. It sort of looked a bit forced, trying to make faces at people. I think one moment it was almost being remonstrated by Princess Anne, sort of chastising him like a child. But again, I'm sure, you know, give him his due, it was probably a pretty stressful situation. He hasn't spoken to his brother at all since his book came out. I understand just a couple of conversations to confirm he was coming with the King. And again, like I said, he has said the ball is in their court, but it's difficult to see how they will want to sit down with Harry, because any time that they have spoken, he's used that against them and put it in his book or interviews. So, you know, it's not going to happen anytime soon.
I thought he did seem like he was having a bit of a fun chat with Princess Eugenie's husband, Jack Brooksbank there. They're obviously great mates.
Well, they are. I mean, they're pretty much his only allies, aren't they? I mean, talk about Princess Anne. She was the one who showed him to pay his last respects to the Queen after she had passed at Balmoral and he arrived late. And again, Princess Eugenie and her husband, Jack, are his allies. They've, you know, they've been through thick and thin with him on this journey. They kind of are supporting him when he's been railing against the other members of the family. So, listen, again, I just think this wasn't the time or the place. He obviously wanted to come to be there for his father's most important moment of his life. But it'll be very interesting to see the relationship over the next few months, I think.
Yeah, sure will. And I'm sure we'll be talking to you about Prince Harry again sometime soon, Russell
He needs
Myers.
to get him a
Something
pint.
tells me that.
Get him a pint. And
yeah, maybe some sleep.
Before you head to bed.
Please, please.
Thanks, Russell.
Good on you, Russ. Millions ended up tuning in around the world. Thousands attended the ceremony itself, and plenty packed the streets of London for the King's coronation.
But the true majesty of the grand spectacle was found in the finer details. So we are pleased to say that the Associate Editor of The Telegraph, Camilla Tominey, joins us now from Hertfordshire in the UK. Good morning to you, Camilla. What did you make of the day?
Well, I think you're quite right there, Jane, in saying that it was the tiny details. I mean, there was the huge spectacle on a grand scale of seeing all of the military out on parade, 7,000 troops. But then it was condensed down to little moments like the ring and the orb and the sceptre. I thought the moment of crowning was particularly significant, not least because of the crying out of God Save the King, which was matched by gun salutes around the country. Actually, for me, one of the most interesting aspects of the ceremony was the anointing, which we didn't see because it took place behind a screen. But it was quite humbling to see the King sort of stripped down to his shirt, kneeling in prayer, being anointed completely in private by the Archbishop of Canterbury. On one hand, it's this sort of major scale event that's watched by billions around the world. But on the other, it's this very human story of a man fulfilling a destiny that he's waited his whole life to do. So I thought it was deeply personal, deeply poignant. The music was out of this world. I thought when the choir piped up as he was being crowned, Zadok the priest, it was quite spectacular, wasn't it?
It was. Let's talk a little bit more about His Majesty and what he was wearing, because there was some rumours swirling that he might just buck tradition and wear a military uniform, but he wore a royal robe. Several, in fact, Camilla.
Well, the royal robe has been worn in the past by other monarchs, including George VI. And the reason for it is a practical one, Clint. It's because when he is anointed, he needs to bare his breast as well as be anointed on the hands and the head. And I think they basically took the conclusion that if he was in a military uniform with lots of buttons, it would have just been too complicated and taken too long. So in the end, beneath that, he's now having the super tunica put on in that particular piece of footage. But I think they decided just to pare it down and keep it as straightforward as possible. We like to see the ermine. Of course, we want to see him in those robes as he's leaving the church. And it's the same with Camilla. Of course, her anointing was more public. But it is those details. And you're watching it thinking, I mean, you can't quite believe what you're seeing, really. I know we've witnessed a coronation in the last century with the Queen being crowned in 1953, but that footage is quite grainy. What we had here was something we haven't seen before, which is up close, personal, just a few meters away the cameras were, and of course in full Technicolor, which makes an enormous difference.
Yeah, it was certainly a spectacle to watch, even all the way on the other side of the world. Camilla Tominey, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Welcome back. Thanks for your company on this Sunday morning. The history of the coronation, it dates back almost 1,000 years, with the first Westminster ceremony taking place in 1066.
Fast forward 1,050 odd years and King Charles is officially the 40th monarch to be crowned. So let's bring in former Palace Press Secretary Dickie Arbiter, who is live in London for us. Good morning to you, Dickie. How significant
Morning, Jane.
was this day for the Commonwealth?
I think very significant for the Commonwealth, because you've got to remember that of the 56 nations making up the Commonwealth, 14 of them are realm states, of which Australia is one of them. And so to see the coronation, to get the reaction from Australians in Australia who've been partying, who've been watching, glued to the television set, it does put a question mark over the future of the monarchy in Australia. Now, your Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, he did say when he took office that the abolition of the monarchy was not on the table in his first term of Parliament. Will it be on the second term of Parliament? That remains to be seen. There still seems to be a lot of popularity amongst Australians for the King as their head of state, as in Canada, as in New Zealand. So history will tell us exactly what's going to happen in the coming years.
Dickie, the King echoed the vow of service during his coronation. Let's take that in now.
God of compassion and mercy, whose Son was sent not to be served but to serve.
It's no doubt quite the legacy to carry on. Do you think the Queen Elizabeth, would have been proud?
I think she would have been very proud. She might raise an eyebrow over the slight changes in the service. To have a gospel choir, she would never have had that. But then she was crowned in 1953 when things were very different. The King is very much a people person. He's very much one for inclusivity, and so he will have as much of the British representative of people within the coronation service, and the gospel choir was just one of those.
Well, talk us through those differences. What was the same and what was different compared to 1953?
Well, the most noticeable difference, I remember watching in 1953 on a 14-inch television screen that was black and white and very grainy. Here, we were watching on high-definition television in glorious Technicolor that you almost felt a part of the congregation. I actually felt that I was in Westminster Abbey witnessing what was happening. I wasn't, but I felt just like that. The service was different. The anointing was different in that for the Queen, there was a canopy that was held in each corner by a Garter Knight. Today, it was a more solid screen held together by guardsmen from the household division. So there were little differences, and it didn't really make much difference because at the end of the day, the anointing was the same, the crowning was the same, and the swearing an oath to God was the same. So we have a king. He has been anointed in the eyes of God, and that really endorses his job as head of state.
Dickie, do you have a favourite moment you can share with us?
Well, I have favourite
Several.
moment. It was a 2-hour service. I've got several favourite moments. One of them in particular, after William had adjusted the super tunica, he stood back and he looked at his father. In the background, you could see his son, Prince George, and he was probably thinking, my goodness, a few years' time, I'll be sitting there. And the other moment was the procession out of Westminster Abbey when the music of Edward Elgar, and the music was the Pomp and Circumstance March No. 4. That always brings a lump to my throat, and particularly today because it was a very solemn occasion, and it was full of emotion as well, given the people that were participating, the fact that the King has waited since leaving the Navy, really, 46 years for this particular job. He's well rehearsed. We know what we're getting because he's been doing it for so long. We know how we stand with him. We know what he thinks. We know he's constitutionally, he's not going to speak out of turn. And with the backing of Camilla, I think we've got a jolly good king and queen.
All right, Dickie Arbiter, always great to get your insight. Probably time to have a rest now. Thank you for
A jolly
joining us
good rest.
this morning. Yeah.